Imagine a world where borders don't matter. Not because of peace, but because someone powerful decided they simply shouldn't exist. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, but the Kremlin did not tell its people we are going to war for more power and more land. Instead, they spoke of higher purpose, defending honor, culture, and the Russian language. At the heart of this story lies a dangerous ideology, the Russian world. My name is Elvira Bary. I was born in the Soviet Union, and today I'll show you exactly how the Kremlin's most seductive idea works and how it manipulates millions into believing that conquest is salvation. Because if we don't understand this idea, we won't just misunderstand Russia. We risk falling into a cycle of endless conflict. At the heart of every Russian ideology lies a single stubborn idea: Messianism, Russia's favorite idea for centuries. In the 16th century, Orthodox Church leaders declared Moscow the third Rome, chosen to save the true faith after Constantinople fell. Fast forward to the 19th century, and Russian thinkers dream of uniting all Slavic nations under the Tsar's banner. A few decades later, the Bolsheviks take up the torch, swearing to liberate all of humanity through world revolution. The label keeps changing, but the spirit remains the same. Russia must rescue someone, somewhere, from something. The mission is always impossible and always grandiose. Today, the slogan reads "Ruski Mir," the Russian world, and it's printed on missiles. To outsiders, it all sounds like a self-imposed, pointless grind. Yet for Russia, a grand narrative is oxygen. Centuries of harsh winters, sudden invasions, and relentless state violence taught people to cling to the idea that their suffering is not random. It must mean something. It must prove a higher calling. Strip away the grand mission, and the Russian identity begins to crumble. So every generation reissues the same script. Russia cannot simply be a large multinational country. It must be the spearhead of orthodoxy, the elder brother of all Slavs, or vanguard of communism, or this season, the mother hen of all Russian speakers, even if they live 2 borders away and prefer Netflix to Channel 1. That's why Russia goes to war. A nation convinced it carries sacred fire will inevitably scorch its neighbors for their own good. Then wonder why gratitude never arrives. Meanwhile, ordinary Russians are left juggling two impossible roles: humble sufferers and chosen superheroes. This tension explains the manic swing from self-pity to chest thumping you feel in every Kremlin speech. Putin didn't invent this. He simply pressed shuffle on a playlist that's been looping since Ivan the Terrible. Ruski Mir is just his remix, and the beat, as always, is salvation, whether the audience wants to be rescued or not. The main survival strategy in Russia has always been resource consolidation, not because of some mystical Russian soul, but because of geography and economic necessity. Central Russia has no natural barriers like mountains, no stone for fortresses, and too few people for such a vast territory. Moving people, grain, and soldiers across endless mud and snow costs a fortune. In these conditions, there is only one way to win wars or build something meaningful: gather many hands into a single mighty iron fist. And you can gather them in two ways: the expensive way, through armies and terror, or the cheap way, through ideology. Ideology convinces people to hand over their resources willingly for some greater cause decided by those in power. Naturally, Putin's regime prefers the cheaper option. Enter the ideology of the Russian world. designed to give people a sense of belonging and identity. Drawing a line between us and them is critical. It creates a sense of danger and the need to mobilize. But it's not enough to name the enemies. You must also define the friends. Who exactly is us? What exactly are we? New philosophical ideas are in short supply in the Kremlin, so they fall back on the one thing that's always available: nationalism. Russian world sounds cozy, like a club for Tolstoy fans or caviar pancake lovers. But beneath the surface lies an ideology that denies state borders. When the USSR collapsed, millions of Russian speakers found themselves outside Russia overnight. The Kremlin offered them a ready-made identity. It doesn't matter if you live in Riga, Almaty, or Brighton. You are still part of the Russian world. This promise hinges on language. Schools call Russian the great and mighty tongue, and the shared cultural code, Pushkin, Tchaikovsky, the 1945 victory, orthodoxy, reinforces a sense of belonging. In 2007, Moscow even created the Ruski Mir Foundation to fund language classes, host folk dance nights, and hand out grants. On the surface, it looks like harmless soft power, tea and samovars. But when politics enters the room, the china rattles. Putin says Russia has no borders, then claims that anywhere Russian is spoken falls within Russia's sphere of interest. Think of a watercolor map, a dab of Russia ink in Transnistria, Narva, northern Kazakhstan, and suddenly the edges bleed. Under the banner of defending Russian speakers, Moscow annexed Crimea in 2014, fueled a proxy war in Donbass, and in 2022 rolled tanks into Ukraine. Mariupol, a largely Russian-speaking city, was liberated through artillery strikes that nearly wiped it off the map, killing thousands. A concept meant to unite ended up pulverizing the very people it claimed to protect. So, what exactly is the Russian world? It rests on 4 pillars. First pillar: language is destiny. If you speak Russian, the Kremlin claims you as kin, no matter your passport or personal beliefs. The Cyrillic alphabet is marketed as a genetic marker, while your Ukrainian or Kazakh citizenship is dismissed as a historical fluke. This belief weaponizes language. If a village chat group still types "spasibo," a thank you, a Russian flag can, in theory, follow. Second pillar: we are a separate civilization. Followers are taught that Russia is neither west nor east, but a third pole, an eternal heartland, older than Magna Carta, deeper than Enlightenment rationalism. The West is portrayed as a sleek shopping mall, bright lights, no soul. China is respected but kept at arm's length. Only the Russian world claims the full metaphysical toolkit: spirituality, conscious, and stoic endurance honed by freezing winters. Third pillar: history grants us a sacred mission. The storyline goes like this: Kievan Rus baptized all Slavic peoples. Moscow saved orthodoxy after Constantinople fell. The Russian Empire rescued Europe from Napoleon. The USSR crushed Hitler. Modern Russia must therefore uphold traditional values against NATO's rainbow flag hedonism. In practice, this mission boils down to reclaiming any land that was ever Russian, regardless of current borders. Fourth pillar: unity demands vertical authority. Individualism is seen as a foreign weed. True patriotism means accepting a power pyramid. God at the top, a Tsar-like president beneath him, security services as righteous warriors, and the common folk forming a humble, grateful base. Dissent equals blasphemy. The ideal citizen never critiques, never questions, but stands with the motherland, lighting candles for soldiers dying for our frontiers. Put these pillars together, and you get a user's manual for belonging. Love the language, distrust the West, revere the past, obey the authorities. And believe these imperatives are fused by fate. The painful is emotional. Your lost salary, cramped apartment, bad roads, these aren't signs of national failure, but sacrifices for a higher purpose. Yet this logic carries a dark clause. If Russian equals righteous, then Ukrainians, Latvians, or Chechens who resist absorption become heretics. If Russia is perpetually besieged, then preemptive strikes feel like self-defense. If the leader embodies the national spirit, then questioning him feels like treason against your own bloodline. This is the Russian world. Warm-sounding words that mask an ideology of endless expansion, righteous conquest, and the sacrifice of ordinary lives on the altar of a grand, impossible mission. The first draft of the Russian world mythology appeared after the Napoleonic Wars, when Europe briefly hailed the Russian soldier as its savior. Enter the Slavophiles. They crafted a chic national label. We are unique, invincible, soulful. We put the spiritual above the profitable, and we are ready to self-sacrifice. Tsar Nicholas I, ironically German by blood, loved the tune and promoted it wherever he could. Before him, Russia's nobility prided themselves on European connections. But after Europe appeared weak and revolution-prone, there was no point in looking up to it anymore. It became fashionable to take pride in being Russian. Ladies at court donned kokoshniks and boyar-style dresses. It was an era of patriotic poetry, operas, naval parades, and even horse breeding, all under the banner of Russianness. Censorship was brutal, but being a Slavophile provided a state-approved path to success. Many took the opportunity. Some truly believed in the ideology. Others simply found it the easiest route to advancement. Communism pressed pause on nationalism, swapping it for internationalism. Yet the song of Russian exceptionalism survived in exile. White officers and disposed nobles clung to it for dignity. Among them was philosopher Ivan Ilyin, writing from Switzerland, who argued that Russia needs a strong, unaccountable leader to preserve unity. It is a God-chosen civilization with a moral mission. Western democracy and individualism are corrupt and unsuitable for Russia. Orthodoxy and tradition are the backbone of Russian identity. Individuals should sacrifice for the nation. Law should be rooted in spiritual values, not democratic debate. Sound familiar to anyone who studied European fascism in the first half of the 20th century? Of course it does. Everyone sang the same tune back then. Glorious nation, sacred mission, chosen people. The only hiccup, they couldn't quite agree on which nation was the one chosen by God. After the Soviet Union collapsed, it left behind an ideological void. And Russians need ideology. Without it, there's no sense of purpose, no comforting story to explain why life is so hard. And without that story, it becomes painfully difficult to answer a simple question: why do we live so much worse than our neighbors? In the 1990s, in smoky Moscow University hallways, young lecturers argued about who owns Eurasia. At the time, Russia could not even rule its own territories, but as we've seen, grandeur and Messianism are oxygen for Russian intellectuals. Out of that ideological fog stepped Alexander Dugin, an ex-occultist who authored the brick-sized foundations of geopolitics, prescribing that Russian land power should squeeze out Atlantic evil. Nearby lurked Igor Strelkov-Girkin, a white guard reenactor who would later call himself the defense minister of Donetsk. They were flanked by billionaire Konstantin Malafeyev with his Orthodox TV channels, Pandit Yegor Kholmogorov, and mystic Alexander Pakhanov of the Zavtra newspaper. Their shared poster reads, "Russia is mighty, Europe is rotten, NATO is satanic." How did that poster reach the Kremlin, a place where the only credo had been unleash the plunder? Simple. In the early 2000s, the regime needed a banner to glue together a bruised society and sanctify oligarch rule. Dugin's circle delivered a ready-made mix, a dash of mysticism, a pinch of orthodoxy, a heap of geopolitics, and best of all, a moral license for expansion. Everyone benefited. Professors got airtime, generals got doctrine, the president got the halo of sacred guardian of Russian civilization. And so, an idea brewed in campus rooms morphed into the Russian world, half fairy tale, half invasion map. It promises greatness while providing a convenient scapegoat for every hardship. Foreign foes, eternal mission, everyone rallies around the throne. That sells far better than boring institutional reforms. And once the budget allows, fresh missiles are staple to back the words. It turns out my hometown, Nizhny Novgorod, is a cradle for modern Russian ideologues. Many familiar faces from my youth now work in the Russian presidential administration, crafting what some call sovereign democracy and others call a digital concentration camp. One of these figures is Sergei Kiriyenko, the first deputy chief of staff for Putin. He and his team oversee the Kremlin's think tank machine, shaping ideology and propaganda. I remember these guys as young, bright, ambitious, eager to build a better Russia after the Soviet collapse. I often wonder how they would have reacted if a fortune teller told them, "You will build a new totalitarian state with your own hands. You will impose suffocating censorship, wage war against Ukraine, and ensure there are no human rights left in Russia." I think their younger selves would have been shocked, maybe even disgusted. But this cycle isn't new. The Bolsheviks who led the 1917 Russian Revolution also started as idealistic youth who dreamed of freedom and justice. Decades later, they realized they had rebuilt the same oppressive state they once overthrew. If you want to see how that transformation happened, I explore it step by step in my historical novel, The Prince of the Soviets. It wasn't foreign spies or aliens who killed the dream. It was the people in power themselves. Today, the Kremlin's ideologists promise Russians a glossy cocktail of cyber tech, orthodox chic, and patriotic hip-hop. But when the brainstorming ended, they reached into a dusty old trunk, pulled out Tsar Nicholas I's toolkit, and gave it a new coat of paint. Nicholas I ruled Russia in the mid-19th century under the slogan Orthodoxy, Autocracy, Nationality. Today it's rebranded as Tradition, Sovereignty, Society. The formula is the same: rule above the law, the church backing him up, and the people told to feel proud. Patriarch Kirill, head of the Russian Orthodox Church, blesses missiles launches, just as priests once blessed cannons during the Crimean War in the 1850s. Nicholas I built the Third Section, a secret police force with a corps of censors. Today, Roskomnadzor, Russia's internet watchdog, wields the block button. The difference is only cosmetic. In the 19th century, police confiscated dissident presses. In the 21st century, censors delete anti-war memes and make sure writers like me cannot publish our books in Russia. The Romanovs pushed Russia's borders into the Caucasus and Eastern Europe under the banner of Slavic unity. Putin's Russia starts with Russia Today broadcasts and Ruski Mir language grants. But if neighbors resist, the playbook reverts to 1850s. Artillery fire, the Russian flag raised, and the line, "We don't abandon our own." Even the victory cult repeats itself. Tsar Nicholas rebuilt Moscow's Christ the Savior Cathedral to glorify Russia's victory over Napoleon. Modern Moscow turns the May Day Victory Day parade into its holiest ritual. Today's packaging of the Russian world is updated for the times. But the engine underneath is antique. This set of ideas is not an ideological iPhone, something sleek and modern. What they ended up with is an old gramophone playing the same tired track. The grand idea behind the war in Ukraine was to unite all Russian-speaking people. It felt natural, woven into Russia's national DNA, but unite them for what? In reality, it meant uniting people to become subjects of a regime that offers no protection for property rights or dignity. Unsurprisingly, no one wants that. The Russian world ideology assumes that people who share a language and cultural roots also share values and desires. Nothing could be further from the truth. Russian-speaking Ukrainians don't want to live under Putin. Millions of Russian immigrants who fled for political reasons have no desire to return to a country where the police behave like bandits and the state views its own citizens as losers simply because they can't rise above the law. The idea of national unity just because is a toxic myth. Some Russians online ask, how can you oppose Russia? But why should we let those who seize power monopolize the right to speak for Russia, calling themselves Russia and branding everyone who disagrees as anti-Russian? Supporting the boss simply because he's the boss is the logic of a serf. If your master quarrels with the neighbor, you're supposed to side with your owner, right or wrong. Not me. I have my own Russia. One where people are welcomed based on moral values, not because they are rich or powerful. And I'm not alone. Here in California, I see many cars with Ukrainian flag stickers. Often, these are Russians who believe it's wrong to attack neighbors and that Ukraine has the right not to be part of Putin's empire. The Russian world ideology was meant to expand Russian power. Instead, it weakened it. Ukraine was the first to cut the linguistic cord. Within months of the invasion, Kiev banned most Russian language books, films, and music. A friend of mine in Kiev, a Russian speaker, switched to Ukrainian after the war began. She told me, I don't want to write in Russian ever again. She made an exception for me because I opposed the war. She shared how during the invasion she fled Kiev with her little sons covering their eyes as they passed bullet-ridden cars marked children on the roadside. Many Ukrainian subscribers now comment on my Russian language posts in Ukrainian. At first I struggled to read them, but I'm learning. People are refusing to speak Russian, read Russian books, or engage with Russian culture. Even I had to switch to English to keep working and teaching, cutting ties with the Russian market. Inside Russia, the cultural space looks like an apartment after a police raid. Directors resign, museum curators flee, and rock bands leave to sing freely. In 2022 alone, about 1 million fled, including businessmen, journalists, and artists, most under 35, fluent in English, unlikely to return. Those who stay live under self-censorship. Websites are blocked, and every word carries risk. Examples. Moscow Council member Alexei Gorinov, 7 years for saying children are dying in Ukraine. Journalist Maria Ponomarenko, 6 years for a Telegram post about the Mariupol theater bombing. Artist Alexandra Skochelenko, 7 years for swapping price tags with anti-war notes. Poet Artem Komardin, 7 years for reading a verse titled Kill Me, Milord, I am tired of being Russian. Nobel Prize-winning human rights leader Oleg Orlov, 2.5 years for writing They wanted fascism, they got it. Rock band B2, blacklisted for a single anti-war Instagram post. The Russian world is contracting on every front. Geographically, it lost Russian-speaking hubs like Kharkov, Odessa, Almaty, and Tbilisi. Culturally, it lost festivals, indie presses, and cross-border collaborations. Politically, Even long-time allies like Armenia and Azerbaijan are stepping back, sensing weakness and avoiding a losing cause. No one is saying Russia will lose the war outright, but it's clear that Russia is losing influence, status, and power, and it will take decades to recover. If Russia truly wanted to spread its culture and influence, there were 1,000 ways to do it, without violence, without imperialism, and without demanding submission in exchange for language. And we've seen it work before. A subscriber from India once wrote to me, in the 60s, Soviet engineers opened a library in my dusty hometown. That's where I first met Dostoevsky. He's not alone. Across Africa and Asia, many still remember those soft power seeds. Scholarships to Friendship University, children's books printed in local languages, mobile cinemas under palm trees. Imagine if today's Russia had chosen to open libraries instead of sending tanks. A reading center in Mariupol with Ukrainian and Russian authors side by side. Russian tech hubs mentoring local teenagers in Uzbekistan. Grants for translating Kyrgyz poetry and Moldovan films into Russian, signaling genuine curiosity. Trust grows like an Instagram story, frame by frame. Moscow could have made it easier for students from neighboring countries to study in Russia. It could have revived Moscow Welcomes Friends festivals, produced TV series starring actors from Yerevan and Tallinn, co-funded clean energy labs and art residencies. The Russian world could have been about meaning, not territory, language as a bridge, culture as dialogue. And maybe somewhere another kid today would be telling his friends about a Russian professor who taught him math, not about a missile that destroyed his street. But that opportunity is gone for now. The question is, what do we do with what remains? If today you saw something clearer, something you had not understood about Russia's true motives, share this video. Because the more we understand this ideology, the stronger we become in standing up to it. Join me. Subscribe right now for more stories the Kremlin doesn't want you to hear. Like and share. Your voice matters.